So initially, I'd like to introduce Igor Kotler. He served as a historian at Survivors of the Shoah Visual History Foundation and at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. He's the president and executive director of the Museum of Human Rights, Freedom and Tolerance here in Northern New Jersey. We have visual and lecture format presentations of various atrocities throughout the world. Mr. Kotler is also visiting research fellow and director of the US-Russia Former Soviet Union Dialogue Project at the Center for the Study of Genocide and Human Rights at Rutgers University. He's a vice director at the International Council for Diplomacy and Dialogue and a senior research associate at the International Educational and Research Center of the Holocaust and Genocide's History at the Russian State University for the Humanities in Moscow. Mr. Kotler.
Thank you. And also, Gideon, a few words about the museum itself.
Yeah, what I said was we have both visual and
Yes.
lecture format presentations of various atrocities, human atrocities.
Yes, but it's not only about atrocities, it's about continuation, in other words, how people build their lives here, in this country, in other countries. It's about different problems and trying to see how people solve them. Okay, but anyhow, let's start. Everybody knows about this crisis or war, actually, between Russia and Ukraine, what we call the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I have no intention to tell you all information from the fronts. You can read about that, about bombing, about everything. I would like to give you some kind of historical background of this crisis. Okay, because many people consider history to be a very abstract kind of knowledge. I believe history is very practical if you can apply it, and it helps us to understand what's going on in the world. So my presentation I called The Tale of Four Vladimirs, and I will take you, I will take you to year of 988, not 1980, 988. Okay, what happened in this year? In year of 988, Vladimir the Great, the Prince of Kiev, started Christianization of East Slavs. At that time, more than 1,000 years ago, there were no Ukrainians or Russians or Belarusians, whom we call East Slavs. There were a bunch of tribes closely related to each other. They were pagans. They spoke what we call Old Slavic language, okay, or Old East Slavic language, and they were connected to each other by this kinship. And Vladimir started Christianity in Kiev. But we have the word Rus here. And can you go to the next one? So before that, Kievan Rus. This is a historical term, and you can see Kiev, you can see other lands. And what is very important to know, Kiev is an ancient place. It was established, we don't know when, probably as an Iranian fortress. At some point, Iranians were able to reach even Eastern Europe in ancient times. And it was their fortress or forepost, but it was time before Moscow. This is also very important. Moscow appeared in 1147, 150 years after the Christianization of Russia. So the historical center, the ancestral home for Eastern Slavs was always Kiev. And the place was called Kievan Rus, not Russia, Rus. And this is a big kind of misunderstanding or confusion. Let's go next. So I put here a small table of different Russians. And I did this in English and in Russian for you at least to see difference in letters. So on the very top, you can see Rus. And we don't know the origin of this word, maybe Vikings who came to Russia, what is Ukraine today, or to East Slavic lands long before, called this place Rus. And it gave name to many areas, what we call today Russia and Belarus and Ukraine. For example, Великороссия, Great Russia. This is a common name for Russia. Great, huge. Belarus, you know, this is not a country, but it actually is White Rus. Okay, Malorossia. If you know the city of Sochi on Novorossiysk, and Sochi you know because of Winter Olympics, this place didn't belong to the Russian Empire before the 18th century. It was taken by Russians. It was called, oh sorry, Malorussia, what I'm talking about, Novorussia, Malorussia. This is the name of Ukraine. Before 1917, there was no name Ukraine in the official imperial papers of the Russian Empire. It was called Malorussia, Small Rus, Small Russia. Okay, Krasnorussia. It was a place forgotten, okay, near Belarus, which was called Red Rus. But now the word Ukraine, what we use today in Russian, Ukraina, I put it in English letters too. In the Russian language means borderland. Even here, you don't need to know Russian. Ukraina, Окраина. Ukraina, Окраина. Окраина in Russian, modern Russian, it means borderland, kind of suburban area, far from here. Novorossia. But now we have Russia, New Russia. This is exactly the place where Sochi and Novorossiysk, New Russia, a place which was taken by the Russian Empire in the 18th century. And now we can see the word Russia, Russia. You see in English RUS, Rus, RUSSIA is Russia. But if you look at the Russian language, you can see in Rus, the second letter would be like English Y, while in Russia it's going to be like English O. Yes, O, and above is like Y on the first line. Yes. In Russian, Russia is Россия, Россия, and Rus is Rus. Two different names. Okay. And the word Россия comes from the Greek language. It was a Greek name, actually coming from Byzantium, for northern lands from Byzantium, for lands of Slavs, and it's called. It was called Russia in the diplomatic papers of the Byzantium in the 14th century. So, for the English heirs, it's the same, Rus and Russia. For the Russian heirs, Rus, Russia. People who live in Russia, all Russian citizens are Россияне. Русские, it means an ethnic group, Russians, who can probably constitute 70% of the Russian population, about 20% of Ukrainian population. So this is what we have here. It's a mixture of terms. Even Russians don't know much about that because Rus and Russia sounds very similar, but they're very different words, and actually behind of them very different concepts. Rus is ancestral homeland. Russia is a modern state. Okay, next please. So the origin of the Ukrainian lands. In the 17th century, there was a place which consisted of different regions, so-called free brotherhoods. There were semi-nomadic Slavic tribes, and they created a culture which turned out to be Cossacks. I didn't put this word in my presentation. Cossacks, it's a very specific subgroup among Russians and Ukrainians. They originated again from this kind of free societies of warriors. They were fighting everyone. There were mercenaries also for Poles and for Turks and sometimes for Russians. And they had a very special status under the Tsars, a special uniform, special ranks, very different. And this institution exists today. But now these lands belong again to several tribes and several semi-nomadic formations. Next one. Now, step by step, these lands were taken by Poland. I don't want to give you the whole lecture about Poland. Poland at some point was a strong, large state, which included Lithuania. At some point, it was called Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. If you imagine the map, the power of this land was stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, actually. Okay, this was large. And Poles incorporated or annexed or took over, whatever it was, want the Ukrainian lands. Ukrainians were serfs under Poles. And let me remind you, Ukrainians are Greek Orthodox and Poles are Catholics. There was also serious religious, not persecution, I would say suppression. And even if you go to Eastern Poland, Eastern Ukraine today, you'll find millions of people who belong to so-called Greek Catholic Church, not Catholic, Greek Catholic. What kind of church it is? This is by rite, by sermons and so forth, it's an Orthodox church which accepts the Pope in Rome. Okay, so they're not Orthodox per se. They're kind of special sect of Catholics, but the Ukrainians. Why? Because Poles forced some Ukrainian serfs to become Catholics. Okay. Stop here. One more thing. And in the 18th century, there were three partitions of Poland. The Polish state was very weak at some point, and three major powers, Germany, Austro-Hungary, and Russia, divided these lands, including Ukrainian lands. And the vast majority, what is today Ukraine, became a part of the Russian Empire. Not only Ukrainian lands, also Polish lands. At some point, Warsaw was under the Russian rule. And I'll show you later. And some parts, again, belonged to Germany and some parts to Austro-Hungarian Empire, a large power of that time. Next. Now, in 1917, the Communist Revolution, Bolshevik Revolution took place in Russia. And in 1918, 1921 was period of the Russian Civil War. I have a mistake with the sorry for the type in Ukrainian. Okay, anyhow, there was a war. During this war, Ukraine declared independence. Okay, this independence was short-living between 1919 and 1921. It was not completely real because there were many fighting factions inside of Ukraine itself, outside communists, monarchists, different groups, anarchists, monarchists and anarchists, and everybody was fighting everyone. And this map shows the claim of Ukraine for its independence. What is very interesting to see, this map is in the Ukrainian language, and they call Russians Moskali. Moskal is a very appropriate word, used to be. Now it is not appropriate. Moskal comes from Moscow, the name for Muscovites, for Russians. Okay, next one. Now, okay, the war ended 1921, and we come to Vladimir number 2. Vladimir number 1 was Vladimir the Great. Vladimir Lenin, the founder of the Soviet Union. In 1922, Vladimir Lenin and his party, the Bolshevik Party, the Communist Party, came to the decision to organize the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Before, it was kind of a loose association of different semi-states. Mainly, the country was called Soviet Russia. Okay. Now, Lenin, who officially promoted the self-determination of nations, came with the idea to create a union. And this union organized the lands of the Russian Empire, which were controlled by the communists. And actually, by the end of the civil war in Russia, communists, the Bolsheviks, were able to regain their power almost of the entire Russian Empire. They lost Finland, they lost Poland, they lost Moldova, and they lost 3 Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Big loss, not the major loss. The country was huge, and actually at some point, as we know, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Moldova were incorporated back into the Soviet Union. Okay, the empire extended again. Now, so Vladimir Lenin established, and next please, established the Soviet Union. So, one of the republics was Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. This name was official, I mean, not Ukrainian, Soviet Socialist Republic for all republics except Russia. Russia was called Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. It was huge and consisted of many different regions. But Ukraine was, along with Belarus, Kazakhstan, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and others, part of this country, which consisted of the peak of its influence, consists of 15 republics, from very small, like Lithuania or Estonia or Moldova, to huge, enormous Russia. And the idea was like in the United States, you know, there are huge states like California, Texas, or Florida, in terms of population at least, or smallest one like Rhode Island. And they're all on the same scale. The same idea was here. So Ukraine became some kind of a state. But again, formally, Ukrainians received their statehood. In reality, it was a part of the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union in reality was not a union. It was a tightly controlled country, and control was coming from Moscow. Moscow controlled everything. Moscow controlled Kiev, Minsk, all capitals, all these lands. Okay, next one. Now, I found this map. I don't like how it's called territories annexed to Ukraine, but this map is very good in terms of how different parts of Ukraine came together. So what we have here, Kiev in the middle, okay, and these lands were controlled by the Russian Tsars from 1654. Ukrainian territories, we understand this territory today was quite small. You can see it. Again, it was a place of Cossacks, okay, mainly. Now, Vladimir Lenin added some areas populated by Russians and Ukrainians. You can see on the right or in the west, in the east, sorry. Now, after the Soviet Union with allies, the United States, Britain, and France, defeated Nazi Germany, some lands from Poland and from Germany came under the Soviet control. The city of Lviv, for example, you can see it. Okay, and this huge area. Actually, it's good to know, because many people don't know this simple fact. Almost everyone knows that on September 1st, 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland. Not so many people remember the fact that on September 17, 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Poland and took over a large part, 1/3 of Poland, and incorporated in the Soviet Union under the name Western Belarus and Western Ukraine, okay, including Lvov. So it happened even not before, after the war, before the war, and these lands were taken. If you look at the map of Poland, the Poland actually switched, okay, or shifted from east to the west, because some lands like East Prussia, a part of Germany, was given to the Soviet Union and Poland. So there was all the time changing borders. And the very last accusation for Ukraine was Crimea. It's on the south. Nikita Khrushchev, who was the general secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union after Stalin's death in 1953. In 1954, Nikita Khrushchev, who was born in Ukraine, gave to his motherland, let's put this way, the Crimea. Crimea is a very, very interesting place. Before the 18th century, it belonged to the Ottoman Empire. Actually, yes, before 18th century. Russians began to attack the Ottomans. There were several wars up to the mid of the 19th century. And finally, the Russian Empire took over Crimea. Crimea was populated by Crimean Tatars, people who speak the language close to Turkish and who are Muslims. And this area was populated by Russian settlers mainly, and to some extent by Ukrainian settlers. In 1944, after Crimea was liberated from Nazis, it was occupied by the Nazis, the Soviet government expelled, deported Crimean Tatars, accusing them to be Nazi collaborators. They were sent to Central Asia, not allowed to live there. And the population of Crimea was growing because of Russians and to a less extent Ukrainians. After the fall of the Soviet Union, many Crimean Tatars returned over there. Now there are three major ethnic groups. The majority are Russians, large number of Ukrainians, and many Crimean Tatars. Okay, let's go further. So now we come to Vladimir number 3, Vladimir Putin. In the very end of 1991, the Soviet Union fell apart on January 25th of 1991, I believe. Russia became an independent country, Ukraine became an independent country, all 15 republics which comprised the Soviet Union became independent, willingly or unwillingly. For example, Belarus did not expect any kind of independence. I traveled over there and they were extremely confused in Belarus getting this independence. So the Soviet Union fell apart. The first president, Boris Yeltsin, supported this idea. He tried to liberate Russia from the communist past to some extent. He tried to fight Soviet legacy. It didn't happen it never happened actually. But in 1991, he appointed the interim president, Vladimir Putin. I believe you know about his past, but just in case. His past is the following. Vladimir Putin was born in the city of Leningrad, which is my native city and actually Ben's native city. I believe he lived just a few blocks from us, or at least from me, when I was a boy. Maybe I met him on the street and I didn't realize whom I met over there. But seriously saying, he was educated at the Leningrad State University at the Department of Law, was recruited to the KGB. I hope I don't need to explain what is KGB, and began to climb the ladder in his service. At some point, he was one of the leading KGB officers in East Germany, which was called at the time the German Democratic Republic under the Soviet Union. So, and he was a professional KGB agent before the fall of the Soviet Union. After that, he had different positions. He was the head of the Federal Security Service, the FSB, which replaced the KGB, or actually the continuation of the KGB, and he became the Russian president. And I remember that year, 2 years or 3 years after he came to power, he talked officially and he mentioned the word державность. We do not see this word very much today in the analysis. Recently, I found this word in the London Book Review. It was mentioned. Someone paid attention. But державность is a very important word. It's very difficult to translate in English. The word держава in Russian is an old word which means the state. But the word держать in Russian means to hold, to grab, okay, strongly. So державность is the holding the power, holding the state together. It's a very important word. I don't know, maybe there is an appropriate English translation, but as an old word, you understand. Behind the word of державность is a czar, a strong leader. Державность, very important. Okay. And Russia is a держава, something strong. And держава means a power, superpower. It's number one. Number two, Russian world. Still, the Russian language is the language of communication between people from all over the former Soviet Union. People in Tajikistan, many of them speak Russian, Kazakhstan speak Russian, Georgia speak Russian, Moldova speak Russian, okay? Like here, English. People from Spanish community talk to Koreans in English here. The same over there. The Russian world, but the Russian world is bigger just to speak the language. Under the Russian world, they understand Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, three Slavic countries, Eastern European, Eastern Slavic countries. Many people consider that this is an artificial division, that Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians are the same ethnic group. Small Russians, Malorossi, White Russians, Belarusi, and Great Russians, Belakorossi or Russians. This is one community. Okay, from this point, Putin and his ideologies return the word Russian world from the old times. This is Russia. But now it's not only Russia, but the Russian Empire. The whole area should be under their control, and they will come to that. There is one more thing which is undercurrent. People don't talk much about it. Okay. People don't talk much about that. But what is the third Rome? Third Rome is the following idea. According to the Russian Orthodox Church, of course, the first Rome was Rome until 1054. Christianity was united at that time. In 1054, Christianity split. Western Christianity under the Pope and Eastern Christianity. Eastern Christianity moved to, just one second. Eastern Christianity moved to the center in Constantinople, which is Istanbul now. It was Byzantium, a Greek empire. It was the center of Christianity. And let me remind you, modern people don't know much about that. In the eyes of Greek Orthodoxy, the Pope was Antichrist. It was heresy, and he was Antichrist. Real Christianity was was Greek Christianity. But also there is one more very important thing. What is the difference between Catholicism and Orthodoxy? In Catholicism, Pope is above the secular power. Pope is the head. In Orthodoxy, the church is under the state. Okay, the Tsar, the king, appoints the patriarch, not vice versa, like in Catholicism. So from this point, what happened to Greek Orthodoxy? Greek Orthodoxy not split it. Really, every church received autonomy. So now we have Serbian Orthodox Church, Bulgarian Orthodox Church, Romanian, Georgian, Russian, so on and so forth. There are many Orthodox churches. You can go to pray in their churches if you're Orthodox, no problem. It's not a religious schism, but there are different. Of course, there is a Russian Orthodox Church with the center in Moscow. So when in the 16th century, Turks took over Constantinople and it became Istanbul, it lost its political power, and the center of Christianity, according to Orthodoxy, went to Moscow. Moscow is the third Rome, a real capital of the Christian world. Now it's not so popular, but it goes undermined. Why? Like an undercurrent. Why it is so important? In 2019, part of the Orthodox priests in Ukraine declared that they have their own church. Before it was called the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. So Moscow controlled the church in Ukraine. Now it's called Ukrainian Church, Orthodox Church of Ukraine. And they received so-called Thomas, the right to be the autonomous church. About 12,000 parishes in Ukraine belong to Moscow, 7,000 to Kiev. So it's a big split, but it's split again, not religious, it's a pure political split, which led to more tensions between Moscow and Kiev, 2019. Now, and finishing up here, geopolitical catastrophe. A couple of years ago, Vladimir Putin said the fall of the Soviet Union was a major geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. Not Nazism, not communism, which cost millions, tens of millions of lives in China and the Soviet Union. No, the fall of the Soviet Union. So in his vision, it was a catastrophe which should be resolved. Something should be done to fix this catastrophe. And the very last thing is, which we can debate, spheres of influence. According to Moscow, according to Putin, Eastern Europe, specifically the former Soviet Union, this is a sphere of Russian influence. And we can talk about this, it's very important, because in this country, in the United States, we talk about the sphere of influence. The Monroe Doctrine, I believe, of 1823, that no foreign powers, except those who established colonies already by that time, can come to this Western hemisphere. And it was used during the invasion in Nicaragua under Reagan, invasion to Grenada, also in Panama. Okay, it was used, again, this doctrine. Recently, I read an article about the Solomon Islands in Oceania, and it was written, the Solomon Islands are formerly under US and Australia influence, a sphere of influence, but now China tries to penetrate over there. And the United States and Australia are very much alarmed of the presence of Chinese in this region, very close to, comparatively close to Australia. So next. So this is the luggage of Vladimir number 3. Now we come to Vladimir number 4. Vladimir, or in the Ukrainian language, Volodymyr Zelensky. His major agenda is to preserve the independence of Ukraine. Okay. He's young, comparatively in his 40s. He became a president quite by accident, actually. He was a popular comedian, and in 2019, there were elections in Ukraine. There were 10 candidates. Here is 10 candidates. Zelensky, being absolutely new to politics, received 30%. Poroshenko, who was president before him, 25%, other less. And next month in March, I believe, there were the second round of elections. He received 70% of votes, but these votes were called protest votes. Many people voted for him just because against Poroshenko. I was in Kiev after the elections. I talked to people and they explained to me that we didn't want Poroshenko and we didn't have any other choices. We elected Zelensky. Zelensky's position again was to try to I would say, fix some ills of the country. The country has a lot of them: Soviet legacy, corruption, political clashes, and nationalism, many of them. How much he succeeded, it's very, very special question. But what should be mentioned, that really he wanted his country to be independent and much independent from Russia. Next. And during the so-called Maidan Revolution of 2013-2014, what happened? There was so-called process of Ukrainization. I don't have time to explain to you this process, only briefly in one sentence. After the break of the Soviet Union, many countries, including, let me put this way, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan and Ukraine and who else, practically all of them, used the local language, the requirement to know the local language, to get rid of potential competitors, or to really suppress minorities. Okay, in Ukraine we call this Ukrainization. Of course, every country has a right for the official language, for the dominant language, but not in the how it was used in many post-Soviet republics, but including Ukraine. So again, I don't have time, I don't justify anyone, but the roots are very, very deep again. These roots of the conflict in Donbass go to at least 50 years, okay, maybe even more, okay. So, but what happened? Russians and Russian-speaking people in Donbass were afraid of Ukrainization. They started separatist movement, and this separatist movement was boosted or was supported by Putin. Putin used this as a political tool, sending arms, sending troops in Donbass, and using the opportunity by annexing Crimea. Okay, saying Crimea is not an Ukrainian land. It was given to Ukraine in 1954, and the vast majority of people who live in Crimea are not ethnically Ukrainians. They're Russians. They should not be Ukrainized. Okay, remember about the Russian world. Okay, so this conflict is very, very complex, very difficult, and there is one more thing which I would like to mention. There was a proposal before Donbass started its separatist movement to create a federal state out of Ukraine. There are some other regions which want more autonomy. Kiev rejected this idea, being afraid of the secession of some lands. Okay, and recently I participated in the conference on Ukraine with Ukrainians, with some political analysts and a member of the parliament and so on and so forth. And one of them said it should be, how he said, translated from Ukrainian or Russian, deep autonomy for the Donbass. If Donbass would be returned to Ukraine. So there were many different reasons for this conflict. Again, I do not justify the conflict. I'm personally absolutely against this aggression. What is my goal here? To tell you about the roots. When we understand the roots, we understand when we understand the roots, we understand the conflict. When we understand the conflict, we can try to solve it. Because again, I talk to Ukrainians a lot due to my work at the museum and some other organizations. Yesterday, I talked to a woman who is in Kiev, and she is in the apparatus, or in the she works for the Rada, for the parliament, and also she talked about that. Yes, both sides should negotiate. She was not talking about Russia, but talking Donbass and Crimea and so on and so forth, because there are realities. And usually in politics, we have realpolitik. It's Bismarck's idea, real politics. We need to understand the motivation, okay? And we need to understand even the enemy in order or either to fight the enemy or to negotiate with the enemy and to come to the peace. At this moment, I don't have any prediction, and let's go further. Because obviously, if Putin's concerns NATO expansion, okay, Russian sphere of influence, we talked about this. He accused Ukraine in genocide against the Russian minority. There is no genocide. I went to Ukraine in 2019. There is no genocide of the Russian minority. And people even speak Russian on the streets and everything I saw. But he considered that there is a threat. Also, he said about Nazification of Ukraine. But Nazification of Ukraine was used as a pretext. Unfortunately, what happened in Ukraine, which is true, Ukraine is a new state, modern state, and it's very difficult for them to find national heroes. Very difficult. And they reestablished names of two individuals, Stepan Bandera and Shukevich, and as national heroes. And Stepan Bandera was the founder of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. At some point, they collaborated with Nazis, hoping that Nazis would give them independence. When they realized it wouldn't happen, they parted from Nazis. Nazis persecuted them too, but there was a point of collaboration. But the most important, these nationalists, Banderas, nationalists were killing Jews and Poles and Russians. Okay, now he's a kind of national hero, and when people have a difficult history, it can happen. But still, you need to be very, very modern and very humanistic to choose your national heroes. Actually, the same problem exists in Latvia, very similar one. Okay, but Russians use this like a Nazification of Ukraine. There is no Nazification of Ukraine. Militarization of Ukraine is connected to NATO expansion. Okay, Putin got afraid of the expansion of NATO, feeling that Russia is really surrounded by enemies. And we have to remember about his past. He is a professional career KGB officer, being taught that the United States, the NATO, and the West dream about destroying Russia. Okay, and next, last thing. Now, about the war. Obviously, the Russians did a lot of miscalculations. I mean, and what is similar to miscalculations of Adolf Hitler when he invaded the Soviet Union. Number one, blitzkrieg. They thought that, number one, the Ukrainian army was worthless. Okay, it turned out not to be. Okay, and when they really stuck with their advances in Ukraine, they didn't have, as we see now, no plan B, what to do. They hoped to take over Ukraine within a few days. Never happened. Number two, weather and roads in Ukraine. It was the stupidest thing to attack Ukraine in the end of February, beginning of March. Mud, muddy, bad weather, bad roads, and snow is melting. Actually, it was a problem of Adolf Hitler, but Adolf Hitler invaded the Soviet Union on June 22. But blitzkrieg didn't work out, and Germans got stuck with Russian winter, with Russian bad roads, with all this mud in the fall and in the spring. So they didn't learn this lesson. It was a bad time to attack Ukraine in terms of roads. Now, corruption in Russia, enormous corruption in Russia, including in the military. Everything is stolen. Everything is sold out. Seriously, enormous corruption. I read an estimate, maybe exaggerated, that 80% of funds for the army are stolen by the generals. Maybe not 80%, 20%. It's enough to undermine the forces, both materially, with ammunition, with everything, and morally. When soldiers know that their officers steal, what kind of morale do they have? Also, unpopularity of Russia in Ukraine. Ukraine is an independent country for 30 years. For good or for worse, I mean, Ukrainian nationalism was developed, and under two presidents, Yushchenko and Poroshenko, and to Zelensky to some extent, the image of Russia was shown as a very negative light for the Ukrainians. And it's connected to one more thing, which Adolf Hitler didn't calculate, and Vladimir Putin also didn't calculate. Adolf Hitler hoped that when his army would enter the Soviet Union, the local population would be delighted because the liberation of the Bolshevism. He forgot that the new generation of Russians and Soviets actually grew up under Stalin. Okay, my father was born in 1922. He never saw the Tsarist Russia. He was a career military officer. Okay, and he was completely dedicated to the Soviet Union. So the new generation of Soviets fought against Nazis. Here we have a new generation of Ukrainians. Those who were born after the fall of the Soviet Union, they never saw Russia. They never felt belonging to Russia. They never had this kind of, they knew about common roots, but we know common roots are historical, cultural, but not political to many extent. So there were several miscalculations. And unfortunately, what we see now, we see a prolonged war with enormous suffering, enormous number of casualties of both sides. Young people die, old people die, war crimes are committed, and there are attempts to solve this problem, but now we are in that end at this moment. Of course, one day the war will be over, we'll learn more lessons, but this is pure aggression. But again, in order to understand, I believe we need to know history and to know the motivation, and to use this historical knowledge, try to help people on both sides, because many Russians, ordinary Russians, suffer, and the country is in bad shape, and people are persecuted because of their views against the war. Thank you.
Thank you, Igor.
So Ben?
Does anybody have any questions? Who's still on?
I have a question, Igor. This is Alex, by the way. How are you?
Good, thank you, Alex.
So how do you see this ending? I know it's a complicated question. I'm just thinking, what do you think in your own head about what you see?
But everyone has three scenarios. Russia occupies Ukraine, it wouldn't happen, as we see now.
Mm.
Now, Russia is defeated, I doubt about that, because if Russia is defeated, this is a political death for Putin, okay? And now they come to they would come to kind of agreement. The major point, neutrality of Ukraine, okay? No Ukrainian entrance into the NATO, okay? And the major problem is Donetsk and Lugansk, what to do with them. Russia, the Russian parliament recognized their independence, okay, and nobody else in the world did it. So, and Ukraine still claims Crimea. Now we have a territorial situation. There are different voices in Ukraine itself. Some voices say, let's get rid of these lands, okay, let them live their own lives, to be a part of Russia, to be independent. Some say, no, we should not, and this is a measure. So what I hope for, that Russia would exhaust at some point, of course, and it seems to be exhausting already to some extent, and they will find the compromise on all these questions, okay? What kind of compromise is very difficult to predict, but they're stubborn Russians, and again, now Putin has no way just to fight until he achieves at least a large package what he wants, okay? And to, in other words, to keep Ukraine in his orbit.
Yeah. Do you think his days are numbered as a president, or?
I doubt about that. I hope but I doubt, because unfortunately many ordinary Russians support this invasion due to the enormous propaganda inside of country. I know this firsthand. I talked to different people, okay, and they strongly believe that Nazis are ruling Ukraine, that the NATO wants to attack Russia, the United States wants to destroy Russia. So I can give you an example. One of my assistants here showed me a text message from her mother, a person of my generation. Her mother, an educated woman with higher education, well-read, sent her a message that I know that the American Constitution contains an article to destroy Russia. So in our American Constitution, it's already, we have a special goal to destroy Russia, okay? So, and they believe in that.
Yeah.
And this is a problem, okay? So, any other questions?
No, thank you so much, Igor.
No problem.
Anybody else have any other questions?
Okay, guys, if you don't have any questions, thank you for your attention. I hope it was not, it was educational, not so boring. And this is a historical material which I try to put together for you to play devil's advocate, okay, for Putin. But Putin used some old terms for new realities, and he is not succeeding with this, okay? But it's very important to know history, again, not because I'm a historian and I'm trying to promote my profession, but because it's, in this case, it's better to understand some currents in the modern thought, politics, so forth. We are based on our past, okay? We are just based on our past, and we can't escape it. And sometimes it works in the very ugly way, like in this Ukrainian-Russian war. Okay, anything else?
No.
Okay, great. Thank you very much again for your attention. Okay, and if you have any questions, send to Ben, and Ben will send to me, and it will be my pleasure to answer them. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to spend the next couple of hours trying to absorb 1,000 years of knowledge. I'm completely blown away by this. Thank you very much, Igor. It was amazing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Ben?